Speedrunning has come a long way over the years. With the growing community, a lot of games got easier over the years and much more beginner-friendly, with more and more tutorials being published to help newcomers learn and understand the tricks. However, there are still games, especially in the Zelda series, that just aren't easy to pick up, as one might assume in the beginning. Also, as there are a lot of people still looking for a game to pick, especially in the Zelda series, we're here to guide you a little through all the 3D Zelda games and what their difficulty rating is, starting from the easiest to the hardest. Just to start this off, Ocarina of Time is the easiest speedrun there is to learn, due to the enormous amounts of tutorials and setups, so it will not be on the list. Also, we will not include the remakes such as Majora's Mask 3D and the Wind Waker HD, even though their runs are quite different. And obviously, these are based on our opinion. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. Number 5.
It was sort of to be expected to see this game on the 5th place, as a few glitches are fairly similar to the ones in Ocarina of Time. However, this game does not have any easy categories to start off with, or that would be extremely beginner-friendly. Especially if the player wants to go with the English route, which at the moment is the fastest in the any percent category, he still has to learn a fair amount of tricks. While hardly any speedrun of this game really uses an extreme amount of different glitches, it is fairly easy to learn, and even the 100% route is considered beginner-friendly by now. The hardest category this game has to offer is probably the all mask category, as the time management has to be on point at some spots. But it isn't really necessary to master this right off the bat. And even if your movement isn't as good as it needs to be to get a good run in this category, there is always the inverted Song of Time, which allows you to get started. Once the player has learned the biggest tricks, such as the infinite sword glitch, super slide, equip swap, and bottle dupe, he's pretty much ready to go and only has to learn the strategies for the bosses and temples. In addition, this is the only game on our list that runs at 20 frames per second, making tricks a lot easier than other games.
Number 4. This game was basically designed for speedrunning. Even if the player has little to no glitch knowledge, this game can be picked up for a speedrun. The times just won't be as good. One of the most important glitches, the whistle sprint, can be learned in a matter of minutes, as well as the infinite horse sprint or the fall damage cancel. The hard part when it comes to running this game is most likely learning the boss timings, item management, and getting your hands on the amiibo NFC chips if necessary. Especially the boss timings can be extremely difficult to learn during the any percent speedrun, as some fights like Ganon's Thunderblight have a very small time window to engage in a flurry rush. For longer categories such as the all main quest speedrun, it is necessary to know tricks such as hard container duping. However, for an absolute beginner, some of the bigger challenges are probably memorizing the routes in this extremely huge world, learning which areas to avoid, how to count stasis flashes, and so on. Even though this game has less glitches to learn for a beginner than a Majora's Mask run does, we consider it harder as the resources can be a little more difficult to understand, and there just aren't as many resources to rely on. Furthermore, learning advanced techniques in this run is more difficult, especially when trying to become consistent. Those include all forms of launches, such as the rocket launch or the super launch, as well as learning how to properly use the shield skew or understanding ragdoll states in general. Number 3.
This game is probably the one with the least amount of techniques among all of them, but this doesn't make this run less interesting or difficult. The run mostly benefits from the back in time glitch, which allows the player to use the file selection screen in order to manipulate the position you will respawn in. In addition, it can be used to get the early goddess sword or skip the wing ceremony cutscene. Apart from this, it has a couple of additional techniques such as brake sliding, which helps the player to move quickly through quicksand. Other than that, it is a fairly straightforward run, but it can be really painful to deal with the controls if the player isn't really used to them. In addition, this run doesn't have any big temple skips, which makes the run really long compared to most other speedruns. In order to get better at this game, it's pretty much mandatory to rely on runs of other speedrunners, learn how cycles of bosses work, and which way is the possibly best for the runner himself to deal with certain areas. Due to the length of the speedrun, it is fairly hard to practice certain areas, as a set of pre-made files is usually necessary in order to properly practice the game. The most popular categories of this run are the any percent and the 100% speedrun, even though it is hard to find 100% speedrunners, as the any percent speedrun is already really darn long. While we wouldn't say that this game isn't harder than Breath of the Wild on a technical level, it is most likely harder to learn as we think it's more difficult to practice this game and not lose track of what to do in which area. Due to areas such as the Silent Realm and its cycles, it can be really frustrating to start with this game, but it is by no means impossible.
Number 2. Now, Twilight Princess has a really rough start. It starts off with a gate clip, which can be really hard to understand as a newcomer, and then follows up with a back in time, which can also be really annoying without help in the beginning. If this wasn't already enough, another really hard trick called Sword and Shield Skip occurs fairly early in the run. This trick is extremely precise and difficult to understand at first, which scares away a lot of the newcomers when trying to learn how to do this. Apart from that, the techniques used in this run can be hard to understand at first, or are difficult to pull off. While there are a fair amount of tutorials, the runner still has a lot to memorize in order to run this game. But if that wasn't enough, the more advanced tricks have a really steep learning curve. It can sometimes take up to 10 hours or more to even learn a single, more advanced trick in this game. Apart from this, the game isn't really available for everyone. The Wii version, for example, cannot be used for the speedrun, as certain glitches are fixed, which means that the runner has to run on the GameCube version, which can be extremely expensive to begin with. Now, apart from all the previous games, this one does rely on frame-perfect tricks at some points in the run, which are harder to hit as there is no way to advance the game frame by frame. There are a fair amount of runners willing to help, but learning and improving in this game is really difficult. Number 1.
Oh god, where to start with this game? The Wind Waker is by all means the hardest and most frustrating game to pick up among the 3D Zelda titles. Not only can it be difficult to obtain a Japanese copy of the game for a decent price, you also need to have a Game Boy Advance link cable to run this game. And this is only to get you started. The movement alone can be rough to understand in the beginning, but even to start learning the game altogether, you need to be able to pull off a variety of different glitches to be able to run the easier routes. This means that you need to understand how tricks, such as dry storage for example, work and how to use them. Dry storage is a glitch that allows you to lock your camera in place as it puts your cutscene value to -1, allowing you to skip cutscenes. While this might sound like a fancy additional trick, it is actually mandatory and can't even be left out to start running this game, as the game would otherwise keep you away from certain areas. And then there is super swimming. While this trick is mostly understood by now, it can be extremely hard to understand it as a beginner. But it wouldn't be as bad if it was understanding alone, as applying the knowledge in an actual run is basically forcing you to pay attention to 3 things at the same time. And these are Link's animation while charging up your swim, the air meter as you need to release your stick during the dirt rat flash of it, and the direction you're heading. If you start using the map as a frame buffering measure, you might end up facing the opposite direction and have to use a backup strategy to not get a slow swim, which ultimately leads to you losing the run. But of course, it doesn't end here, as the player needs to be able to maintain an input rate of optimally 15 B inputs per second in order to perform a trick called zombie hovering over the course of over 30 seconds. If you mash the button slower than 10 times a second, you'll even end up losing height, which can kill your run altogether. You also have to be able to use the Tingle tuner on your Game Boy Advance at the end of this trick, as Tingle just doesn't react during the pause menu. And then you have to learn the audio cues that Tingle gives according to the potion you just bought with your rupees to not be in the wrong position as you regain your health. Still not convinced? The speedrun of this game has by far the longest intro of all the 3D titles and has a fairly slow start if you go with one of the beginner routes. In addition, one of the most feared tricks of beginners in the game, Great Fish, can sometimes take up to 3 hours for a beginner to get this trick for the first time during a practice session. But if you manage to learn it all and want to learn more advanced techniques, get ready to get really frustrated, as things such as buffered super swims or a variety of cutscene skips can end your run really quickly. On the plus side, however, there are a lot of resources to learn from, and this game has decent practice cheat codes that you can use. But this pretty much explains why beginners hardly ever start running the game in full and prefer to only run up to Din's Pearl or the Master Sword in the beginning. We'd even go that far and say that The Wind Waker isn't only the hardest Zelda speedrun to learn, but it is probably one of the hardest speedruns to learn, period. And this concludes our video on the hardest Zelda speedruns. Let us know if you agree or disagree with certain games, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet.